Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. In this episode, I sit down with Rebecca Zung, a renowned expert in negotiating with high conflict personalities. In essence, that's personality disorders. As the author of Slay the Bully, How to Negotiate with a Narcissist and Win, Rebecca and I talk about all of what it means to negotiate with a narcissist. That was my first inquiry. And also what it means to, and I'm doing air quotes here, win. She emphasizes, and I completely agree with her, the importance of emotional regulation and understanding the dynamics. This is the critical point. And this is sort of what's at the essence of this podcast, is really understanding the dynamics of narcissistic behavior. Anyway, this is a fascinating discussion. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So without further delay, I'm going to bring you right into the episode. And as always, if you have any thoughts or questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me. Okay, here's my interview with Rebecca. Hello, Rebecca, and welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. We're so excited to have you here with us.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk to you.
Okay, great. Rebecca, you're the author of Slay the Bully, How to Negotiate with a Narcissist and Win. You're an expert in the field of negotiating. So maybe that's a good place for us to start. What does negotiating, let's say, or winning, and in what kind of situation?
Yeah. So to me, winning really looks like freedom for you as human. It means being able to have personal success. And in order to be able to do that, you have to be able to come to a resolution. And in normal circumstances, in regular circumstances, most people can sit down and have a conversation with people and go, how can we come to a resolution that works for both of us? And where we can look at what are the circumstances here? What do you want? What do I want? How can we look at what both of us want and come to some kind of a conversation that works for both of us? Yes. When you are talking to a person who has narcissistic qualities or even narcissistic personality disorder, it's a completely different type of a conversation because you are talking to a person who has damage to the limbic system part of their brain. And potentially when that is happening, the emotional center of their brain could be activated. The cortex part of their brain could potentially be shut down because of what's happening. They're in their fight or flight mode. And if that's happening, then you're not dealing with a person who's rational. You're not dealing with a person who wants to work with you in a rational state. And so this person is not even working in their own best interests a lot of time.
Can I hover over that point just for a moment to go a little deeper into it? What I'm picturing then is just the act of negotiating or having a conversation that requires two people to come together and have some kind of compromise. Already you're saying the person who may be narcissistically disturbed already is what we call in my field dysregulated. I think you're saying like activated, but they're already in a dysregulated state. Which means they're not thinking in a logical or reasonable way. Like they're just fighting for whatever the argument or the conversation. I said argument because it probably turns into an argument as it keeps going.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so they're looking for, in narcissistic terms, for supply, meaning what they want to do is continue to manipulate. And so what most people think is they just want to win, they just want money, and so people are looking for that external. They think this is what they want. What do they want? Let me just give it to them. But that's not what they want. They really are looking for ways to continue to manipulate this other person. And so they're trying to overlay rational on what's not rational. And so you can't put rational terms into this negotiation. And that's why it continues to spiral and spiral.
Yes.
And so when you're trying to negotiate with this person, the regular rules of a negotiation don't apply.
Yeah.
They just won't apply. As having to negotiate with a narcissistic personality means that creating leverage, creating ways to communicate with this person are completely different. You have to learn how to, first of all, potentially regulate your own nervous system first.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And then learn how to communicate with this other person in a way that you're going to get what you want or get to the place that you're going to be able to move on and have the outcome that you want.
With that, such an important piece, maybe the most important, if I, not that I'm prioritizing like a list of importance, but being in your own regulated state of mind is such a first and necessary step, because if you too get pulled into this, like you said, I'll just give a quick example of what you reminded me of. I'm sitting with a couple. This is a narcissistic relationship, and she tries to start being reasonable with him. In other words, he got angry with her because whatever, she left. She excused herself in the middle of his story, right? And she's trying to explain to him for the third time that whatever reason it was, in reality, why she needed to excuse herself. And at some point, I just say to her, no, you have to stop. It's not working because he's not there. But then what happens if you let it continue, and I'm sure you experience this as well, she starts getting more and more worked up, trying then to make her point heard. But he's not in a place to hear her point. Her point doesn't matter because he's in his own dysregulated state. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And the more that she tries to do that, she just has to realize. I remember one time I had a client who called me up, and she just had an interaction with her soon-to-be ex. And she went on and on. Can you believe he did this? And can you believe he did that? And can you believe? And after she stopped, I said, yes, I can. What I can't believe is that you can't believe it. You told me that he's been like this for 15 years. So how about you reframe this and go, oh, I know that he's always going to be like that, and expect him to behave like that. And we just go, oh, I know that this is how he is. Just know that this is what I'm going to be interacting with. And in fact, just document the behavior. And every time he's late or every time that he acts up, then you just document it and go, thank you for the gift. Thank you for the gift, because that becomes a pattern of behavior that you can use to document. And therefore, it becomes a point of leverage for your case. Reframe, it becomes a reframe for you.
Let's go into that because my listeners may not be so familiar with your background. So you're an attorney. So when you say your case, you're not talking just about a regular relationship. You're talking about a court case at this moment where you're trying to negotiate something for your client. Is that the situation?
Yeah, whether it's a divorce case or a business litigation, or maybe it's a business partnership that went wrong, or maybe it's even if it's not necessarily a litigation, maybe it's a situation where you're dealing with a colleague and you don't know if you're going to end up with an HR situation, or maybe it's a boss, or maybe it's a subordinate, or maybe it's somebody that you're going to have to deal with in life. But if you are thinking this is a person that is going to eventually be somebody that you have to deal with, and you're going to have to prove their behavior, or in some way documenting their behavior is something that you're going to want to do, because in that discard phase, they will want to take you down before you take them down, because they're afraid of what you might say about them. And so they start to smear you. And that the birth of the smear campaign happens during that discard phase. And so having documentation or proof of what's been said is going to be important.
So the smear you part is like the smear campaign may be making some kind of false accusations about you at work or something, maybe how you're not performing or something along those lines?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times, especially if you're dealing with a covert narcissist, it's not necessarily in an overt way. With a covert narcissist, it might be in a covert way. They might couch it in terms of care. So what a covert narcissist might do is, oh, I'm so concerned about Susie. She's been late a lot at work, and that's not like her. She's usually on time. I don't know what's been happening with her.
Yeah. So just in the fact, just in the act of doing that, I think this is what you're saying, but just correct me if I'm wrong. Just in the act of doing that, it's not an expression of concern or care, but they're putting something out in the environment to call attention to the fact that Susie has been late to work in this example.
But they're really doing that because they are positioning themselves as better than Susie because they want the promotion at work or something to that effect.
So now, just out of curiosity, in your profession, what you're doing, this is the kind of stuff that you see. Are you with, who are you working with in this example? Are you with Susie or are you with that person who started the smear, or both of them? Maybe you're with both of them?
In my profession now, what I might be doing is I might be training the team. At this point, I train corporations, I certify coaches. So I might be certifying the coaches that train the teams. So I might be training the CEO who's helping the people or dealing with the people. At this stage in my career, I'm coaching people, certifying people.
Rebecca, this may be good for the audience if you don't mind. Maybe we can lay down a little foundation. You may get called on to the case because there's some kind of work situation that they're not able to resolve. They know there's some conflict going on at work. Maybe the employees are arguing or something's happening or like these manipulative things that you just mentioned. And then you come in to train the team to do what? Be more aware of these subtle dynamics that you're describing? Is that what happens?
Yes, we'll come in and train the team. We will help the team create a team success playbook. We will help them create KPIs, create group. We help them create their own success playbook so that they now have their own training. They have their own accountability tracker, so that they know exactly what they're going to be, the standards are going forward for the team. Exactly what we do, and then coach their team on exactly how they're going to be handling the situations going forward.
So let's go back to your book for a moment, if I may. So the title of the book, it's Slay the Bully, but the slay is all in capitals, right? Is this part of the slay? What is the slay, in other words, all about? Because I know there's some attention to it in the title of the book.
So SLAY is an acronym. It stands for Strategy, Leverage, Anticipate, and You. Strategy is where you start. You have to have a vision. You have to have a goal. It's like the GPS. Where are you going? And that's really where we start when we help companies as well, or when we help individuals, and where I start with my coaches as well, or any negotiation. And I think this is in life as well. So where are you going and what's your vision? I like for people to start with your future. What do you want? What's your vision? Have it to be really super specific. And that is the thing that continues to pull you forward. What is it that you want? And then the next thing is leverage. How do you create that leverage? When you're dealing with a narcissist, there's two different forms of supply. There is what I call diamond level supply, which is all driven by ego, image. They will protect and defend this at any cost. So that is anything related to, could be prestige, it could be the types of friends that they have, it could be how they look. to the world. It could be the type of job that they have. It could be the home that they have. It could be their new wives. It could be the judge in a case. It could be any combination of those things. But I call it the outer shell,
Like
right?
is it like their primary source of supply? Is that fair
Primary
to
source,
say?
it's definitely the primary source of supply.
Okay.
They will protect and defend this at any cost. Okay.
It keeps them
Then-
alive. Yeah, it keeps them going. Okay.
Absolutely. Secondary source of supply is what I call the dark underbelly of supply. Also very important. Also part of their drug addict. They're addicted to all forms of supply, but it is their secondary source of supply. This is manipulation. This is pushing other people down to make themselves feel good. This is controlling other people. It's that talking badly about other people, the smearing of other people, that side of things.
Yeah, like that example you gave earlier with Susie, right? That would be like this kind of supply. Oh, I'm concerned about Susie always being late. Yeah.
They don't necessarily show other people, but it's also very important. But when you're creating leverage, what you want to do is actually threaten a source of supply that's more important for them to keep than the supply that they get from manipulating, because that's how you actually create that leverage, because they will let go of that what I call coal level supply in order to protect that diamond level supply.
Okay.
And then A is anticipate.
Before you tell us about A, if you don't want to give away too much of the book, just tell me I'm asking too many questions. Okay, Rebecca, feel free. Okay. But I'm wondering, when you want to leverage that supply, like kind of the Susie example, do you have an example, like a little bit like example of that in mind, just so we could picture it? Like, what do you threaten? Like, you have to threaten something, like to take it away. I think that's what you said.
Yeah. One of the most glaring examples that I have is I had a case one time where we had a guy who was a Fortune 20 CEO, and he was on top of the world. And in this particular divorce case, he thought he had all of the leverage. He was always in control of the marriage, of the wife, and he thought that he had all of the leverage going into the divorce as well. But then it turned out that he had a secret life, and that was that he had a propensity for hiring sex workers. And turned out that he ended up contracting herpes, and the wife had never been unfaithful to the husband. And she ended up going to the OBGYN to find out why she had this outbreak, and found out that she had contracted herpes. And so then in Florida, where I practice law, you could add a tort to the divorce case for civil assault and battery for sexually transmitted diseases, and actually ask for a demand for a jury trial for that.
Wow.
Yeah. And so what we did in the mediation was add a count for assault and battery to the pleading and say that we were going to do a demand for a jury trial, which he definitely did not want, because he did not want the world to know that he had hired sex workers and all of this.
Yeah.
And we said that we were going to amend the pleadings and ask for damages, because she was going to have this for the rest of her life. There's a cure for this. And also ask for intentional infliction of emotional distress, because she was going to have to deal with this for the rest of her life, psychological. She was going to have to disclose this to any subsequent lovers that she was going to have, and all of this. And so therefore, we asked for liquidated damages and all sorts of things at mediation, which of course he paid, because so all of a sudden we ended up with a lot more leverage, and it really shifted the way that the case went in our favor.
Well, that's a wonderful example. Yeah, thank you for that. That helps really clarify it. And that is some serious leverage. My gosh.
Yes. Yeah. So at mediation, we showed the pleadings that we were going to be filing, and he ended up settling in mediation.
I got it. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. I interrupted. You were going to tell us about the A next.
Yeah. So A is anticipate what the narcissist is going to do and be 2 steps ahead of them. So in this particular instance, there's so many things that you can do. I always say there's such a difference between a grandiose narcissist, a covert narcissist. If you know the type of narcissist that you're dealing with, you can anticipate what they're going to do, be 2 steps ahead of them. And what I mean by this is know that they're going to try to bait you, know that they're going to try to trigger you, stay calm, know how to behave, know how to communicate with them, have responses at the ready, have a way to communicate. In my programs, I have like 30 email templates and text templates so that you can direct them and say, okay, if they say this, here's what you can say. If they say this, here's what you can say. So that you can stay calm, stay at the ready, be 2 steps ahead of them. Because they're actually, I always say they're very difficult to deal with, but they're actually very simple to understand. You know that they're going to behave in a certain way. And so if you document, you can create patterns. You can create from what I call their gifts, which is constant lying, constant being late, all of the things that they're going to do. Patterns start to emerge from the documentation. And you can say, okay, they didn't pay 62% of the time. They asked for change in the schedule 83% of the time. They didn't do it. And so you can actually start to create this leverage, which will expose their behavior. And then that's how you start to leverage against that, what I call their diamond level supply. And that's how you can start to. And then if you stay rational, you stay calm, and then communicate with them in a way that takes away from their need to trigger you. Because really their hook point is getting you emotionally charged. That's what they do. And as long as you don't buy into that bait, then they don't have any leverage anymore, because that's what they try to do. They
Especially if you can anticipate it like you're describing. How valuable is that? I'll just share something that I was thinking as I was listening. So since I rolled out my podcast, it's been about 1.5 years. A lot of my practice now is comprised of people who have these narcissistic characteristics. And one thing that, not often, but you see this sometimes, one way for them to get control is to not pay their bill, right? You mentioned bill. I had 60% or something. I said, oh, that sounds very familiar. So then I'm in an awkward position of having to chase somebody for services rendered, anticipating this now. For the first, I've been in practice for 20 years. I had to change my policy where patients now pay ahead of the appointment. In other words, if you want to book an appointment and reserve my time, it's not solidified on my calendar until it's paid for. But this is a great policy because it doesn't compromise me now, and I'm free to do the work with them without feeling resentful or like I'm owed a couple of months of back invoices. So I appreciate that. I anticipate. Yeah.
I always say, while they're difficult to deal with, they're actually very simple to understand, because they're like, as far as like supply.
We have one more, right? The why.
The why is the best one, because if you are grounded and know who you are, so the why is you and your power, because that is your superpower. Because you know who a narcissist respects the most and is so afraid of is the person who really knows who they are. A narcissist totally respects a person who knows who they are, and that's who they're afraid of. They're afraid of a person who sees them, knows who they are, and the truth of the matter is a narcissist is more afraid of you than you are of them. They're afraid of you abandoning them. They're afraid of you leaving them. They're afraid that you're going to see who they are. And the more powerful you become, the more you are evolved, the more you stand up to them, the more they're going to start having a tantrum and all of those things. But it's because that's their worst fear.
That's the why. That's you. You have to be in a regulated state of mind, right? Not dysregulated. And once you're you and you feel that confidence, or you create the structure, like I mentioned with my billing policy now, then you feel more secure because you have the structure to fall back on. That's really
Right.
wonderful. I really like the sleigh. That's very creative, by the way. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And like the whole thing is you spent the whole relationship probably like trying to prove yourself and trying to be nice and hustling and trying to give more and do more and
Yes.
be more and give more and thinking like that's going to prove to them that you're worthy and trying to get more respect from them and thinking that eventually they're going to respect you more. And that's the big lie. That's the big myth.
Yes, let me say something just so for the audience, I'm putting in a plug for your podcast right now, okay? So Rebecca and I are going to do an episode on her podcast. Please go over there and check it out. And what Rebecca's talking about right now is more or less what we're going to dive into, which is like how complicated it is for both partners to be in a relationship. I would call them a narcissistic relationship. Other people say in a relationship with a narcissist, but it's a little more complicated than that. And I think that's what Rebecca's highlighting right now. But we're going to go into that in far more detail.
Yeah. We're going to talk about the whole thing with covert narcissists and the whole thing, right?
Yep. What final thoughts? Because we have to begin to pull it together. And you've done a great job laying this all out. So thank you again for that. But is there anything you want to leave the audience with? Any final thoughts or takeaway points?
Yeah. What I always like to leave people with is that you and you alone create your value, that you have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody else does. You define your value. And that when you walk into the room, that you influence the room. You get to influence the power of the room and define that value. And everybody feels that, including the narcissist. And when you feel that with every cell of your body, that's what the true persuasion is. And that's what defines everything. And once you feel grounded in that, nobody can touch you.
Well, very nicely said. You're going to send me all your links, right? Because you're all over social media and have a long list of accomplishments, some of which I mentioned at the beginning of this show. But the listeners can find out more about Rebecca. She's going to send me the most important ways, right, Rebecca, if they want to connect with you. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Okay. Until next time. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.